when you look at it and take Magic and Steph out of the equation, because that's everyone's top two, that's the king and the prince right there. Those are the top two. But outside of everyone, Chris Paul gets crapped on for not winning. But besides Magic, Steph, and then Isaiah Thomas, what other point guard was winning like that? I heard these conversations about Kyrie Irving and how he's better than Chris Paul. And I heard these conversations, and I'm seeing some tweets about it. I'm seeing some TikToks about it. I'm seeing all these things about it. And in my head, I'm thinking, because remember, I grew up on this. So 26 years old, a lot of people my age, we grew up on this. So we have a pretty good memory of their careers, you know. And man, I'm over here hearing these conversations. These are people I've seen, literally watched from when they were drafted up into their prime. And now as they're aging gracefully, Kyrie Irving, right now, he's better than him, right? But as I'm recalling their careers and their respective careers and what they've done, I keep thinking back of, when has Kyrie Irving ever been better than Chris Paul? You know, when Chris Paul was on the Hornets, he was a baller. He was a hooper. When Kyrie came into the league as a rookie, Chris Paul was better at that point in time. Chris Paul then joined the Clippers, right? And throughout his whole tenure on the Clippers, I've never heard anyone say that Kyrie Irving was better than Chris Paul. I've never once heard that. It was always Chris Paul was the best PG in the league. Then Stephen Curry came, and then he became the best PG in the league. But Chris Paul was always number two. He was always number two. And then you had your Russell Westbrook conversations that happened. But those were, and then James Harden, depending on if you classify him as a point guard or shooting guard. But those three, Russ, Chris Paul, Stephen Curry, throughout Chris Paul's career, those were the three top people in terms of, all right, this is the best point guard in the league right now. You had Rondo for a little bit, but I don't have to get into that so much. So it's just very odd to me. Kyrie Irving was never that. Kyrie Irving was never in those talks. Kyrie Irving, back when they were playing in the 2016 finals, people were getting on Stephen Curry mainly. It's more so hate towards Stephen Curry, saying that Kyrie Irving was better. But no one was really talking about Kyrie Irving as a definitive number one guy in the league in terms of point guard. So, and that was in their prime. This is in their prime, in their peak. I don't know where these conversations came from. Through my generation and what we've gone through, Chris Paul has always been better. Chris Paul, even in 2021, was classified as better than Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving was battling injuries in that time. I remember in 2021, when they were making it to the finals, Chris Paul was doing what he was doing on the Phoenix Suns, him and Devin Booker, and Chris Paul had a phenomenal year that year. I didn't even hear anyone say back then that Kyrie Irving was better than Chris Paul, right? So I don't know where this came from. Maybe it's younger guys that's over here trying to rage bait us. Maybe it's younger guys trying to give more props to Kyrie Irving, but this has never been the case. When we look at Kyrie Irving and his career and compare it to Chris Paul's, we have to be honest and real with one thing. Kyrie Irving, and I love him, he's a hooper. Kyrie Irving is a guy that injuries definitely hurt who we could have seen him to be, right? Him as a one guy when he was on Boston. Then, you know, him as a one, even with Luka being hurt, right? Kyrie Irving as a one, we weren't able to see like that, mainly because of injury. He went to Boston, and then right after Boston, he got paired up with KD. We don't really know who that is. We just don't. Kyrie, we know what he can be in the regular season. We know the great skill set that he has. But when we look at him and then look at Chris Paul, we have Chris Paul, a guy who consistently has led his team to the playoffs year in and year out. If there's one thing about Chris Paul and whatever team he's on, know that they're going to make the playoffs. For the majority of his career, this is on the Hornets, this is on the Clippers, even OKC. When he got traded, when he left the Houston Rockets, he goes to OKC, a team that was not even projected to make the playoffs. That team made the playoffs back in 2020. They were going up, and then they faced the Houston Rockets and almost beat the Houston Rockets because of how Chris Paul was playing. And Chris Paul got a team that was projected to miss the playoff. Chris Paul, him on the team at an older age, was a guy that was a main catalyst of them making it that far. Think about that. So Chris Paul is a guy where if there's one thing you know about him and the teams he's on, they're always going to be making the playoffs. They're always going to be making playoff contention. And all the disrespect that Chris Paul gets in his career about playoff dropping, he never won, yada, yada, yada. When you really actually look at the numbers and look at the stats and just look at Chris Paul and what he's done in the postseason, you see a pattern of Chris Paul. What he does in the postseason is his volume and shots go up. But along with the volume of shots, the points go up, and his percentages don't waver like that. Chris Paul is always a guy who's going to be giving you, 52, maybe like 50 to 52% from the field, 34, 36% from three. And, he's always a good free throw shooter. He's always a guy that either maintains what he was doing in regular season or even increases it with volume and sometimes even percentages in the postseason. So Chris Paul is a guy who consistently leads his team in the playoffs. Chris Paul's a guy where in the playoffs, instead of him being the traditional point guard at time, which he does love doing in the postseason, but he also understands to elevate his play and elevate his scoring and elevate his volume so that his team can have the best chances to win. I remember back, 2013, 2014, man, Chris Paul was showing up big in the clutch, man, against the Spurs. He had a game winner on them boys, man. Chris Paul has always been a hooper like that. One of the best mid-range shooters we've ever seen in the NBA history, right? So Chris Paul not only leads his team to playoffs, but he has a consistency of elevating his play in terms of his production and scoring consistently. So when we compare that to a guy like Kyrie Irving, Kyrie don't even play defense the way Chris Paul can play defense. So I don't understand how you have two players, Kyrie Irving, great scorer, great ball handler, great three-level scorer. Better three-point shooter. If you want to say better mid-range shooter, that's probably a debate, probably a better finisher too. In terms of the handles, he probably has a better handle too, right? Now when we look at Chris Paul, just on par mid-range shooter. He's not a better three-point shooter. He's probably not a better finisher. He's a better playmaker. He's a better passer, better facilitator, better defender. Like, Kyrie has better handles, but in terms of controlling the rock, controlling the pace of the game, Chris Paul, he has that. And Chris Paul, unlike Kyrie Irving, has a history of leading his team to the postseason. Not only leading his team to the postseason, seeing what he can do in the postseason, and that's something that Kyrie Irving just doesn't have at his disposal, right? So Chris Paul. So to me, like, the clear option is Chris Paul. The clear option is Chris Paul being a better player than Kyrie Irving. Majority of the evidence all points to Chris Paul being a better player. And I just don't understand how these talks and conversations happens like that. I think the disdain of Chris Paul, I don't understand why. It really started with the Rondo incident. I'm not going to lie. Everyone started hating on Chris Paul when Rondo punched him in his face and called him a dirty player. And I don't know why they switched up on him like that, honestly. Even though Chris Paul, you can probably say he's a dirty player, everyone switching up because Rondo punched him in the face is crazy to me. It was really after then that Chris Paul started getting these tags. Chris Paul started getting classified as cheater, playoff dropper. He started getting crapped on for not winning. And I'm just sitting here like, that's kind of weird that you guys are doing this because Rondo want to punch him in his face, that Chris Paul all of a sudden is a terrible guy. He's a terrible teammate. I heard Chris Paul being classified as a terrible teammate before. And I'm going to be honest with you. You can say what you want about how the other players on opposing teams feel about Chris Paul, but I have not heard a lot of news breaking about Chris Paul being a terrible teammate. Chris Paul, it seems as if he's had a consistency of having a great relation with his teammates. You know, he went to the finals to support Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Again, they played with each other back on OKC. Him and Devin Booker has always had a pretty good relationship with each other. Y'all really going to let Rondo really have this? Y'all going to let Rondo affect your opinion? You're going to let what happened with him and James Harden affect how he is as a teammate? Because him and Blake Griffin seem like they get along. Him and DeAndre Jordan seem like they get along. So I don't – what sense is this making? You're going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, he's a bad guy. He's a bad teammate because him and James Harden had a falling out. Come on. And I think time has shown James Harden and like the type of person who he is to show where, okay, that falling out was probably a lot on the other side than Chris Paul. That's a whole different discussion for a different day, right? But this is something that we got to point at. These are things that we have to look at. And Chris Paul getting this hate really started back in 2019, 2018, 2019. So I don't get it. So I don't get where the hate comes from, especially a guy in Chris Paul where I'm not going to lie, Chris Paul definitely has the case to be a top 3 point guard of all time. He really does. When you look at it and take Magic and Steph out of the equation, because that's everyone's top 2, that's the king and the prince right there. Those are the top 2. But outside of everyone, Chris Paul gets crapped on for not winning. But besides Magic, Steph, and then Isaiah Thomas, what other point guard was winning like that? To me, I just don't understand how Chris Paul gets so much hate when he's just better than a lot of these other guys. So to me, he's a top 3 point guard. Not only a top 3 point guard, he's he's just one of the most disrespectful players. So I think what NBA fans need to stop doing is they need to stop penalizing guys for things that they don't penalize other players for. If we're going to fix the toxicity, and we could probably clip this up. If we're going to fix the toxicity of the NBA fan base, because the NBA fan base has a very bad habit of pointing the fingers at everyone else, but never pointing the fingers at themselves. If we're going to fix some of the issues, one of the issues we need to stop doing is stop penalizing players for other things that your favorite players also has failed in doing. Stop penalizing Chris Paul for never winning a ring when Russ has never won a ring. Stop penalizing Chris Paul for playoff dropping when he hasn't even been a playoff dropper like that, when some of your favorite players have been playoff dropping. If I'm going to be honest, maybe a hot take, but look at Stephen Curry in his postseason. He doesn't have really a lot of postseason elevation, if we're going to be honest. So we don't even hold a lot of these other guys to the same standard we hold everyone else to. So what are we doing? What are we doing as an NBA fan base if we're not going to kill everyone for the same thing we're killing one person for? We got to be honest, and we got to be real with that. We got to stop doing that. So if we're going to fix the toxicity of the NBA community, start really looking deep into your list and seeing if you're applying the same logic and the same consistency with everyone. Because if you're going to knock CP3 for not winning a ring, I want to hear the same pressure being applied to John Stockton, because John Stockton didn't even win a ring, and he had a better player on his crew for the majority of his career. He wasn't even the best player on his team, and he still couldn't win a ring. Chris Paul had James Harden. He took that Golden State Warriors to 7. And I'm still convinced to this day, if Chris Paul did not get hurt, I'm so convinced that in 2018, the Houston Rockets would have been your NBA championships. Would have been your NBA champions. And that changes the whole trajectory of the NBA. That changed the whole storyline, the whole trajectory of the NBA and what we have today. Like, I'm so convinced of that. Injuries has really been unfortunate to Chris Paul. Really, it really has. So we got to stop doing this. We got to stop doing this to CP3. That is a great player. One of the greatest players we've ever seen in our lifetime. Stop holding him accountable to things that you don't hold other people to, please.